1. I was in the military until re-enlistment. I was a mechanic. Not a very good one, but I could change parts with the best of them. This happened over 20 years ago. I did clean up the language a bit, but I think you will enjoy it. Our platoon mostly had very good leaders, but we did have one douche staff sergeant who was the absolute worst. When he arrived, we already had a motor sergeant and a platoon sergeant, both of whom outranked him, so he was assigned to the job of managing our vehicle inspections. They were daily, weekly, monthly, etc. inspections that had to be performed. Not a difficult job, but one they assigned him to get him out of the offices, since he didn't have anything else to do and nobody really liked him. Every Monday, the vehicle operators from other platoons would come to the motor pool to do the weekly inspection. The mechanics were assigned a set of vehicles to cover. We would usually work the repairs that could be done immediately, like replacing lights or tightening loose bolts. Then, during the week, we would make all of the other repairs. And when we were done, typically Friday, we would sit down to order all the parts that we didn't have in supply. I was working when one of the operators placed his inspection sheet on my clipboard and left. When I looked at the paperwork, I noticed that his sheet listed a needed repair that was considered a deadline deficiency, a repair that must be performed prior to operating the vehicle per regulations. I informed the motor sergeant, and he said that particular repair wasn't critical and nobody was really certain why it was considered to be a deadline. He also said that he would notify the platoon using it and would ask them to bring it back when it was convenient. Usually, if a deadline vehicle were being operated, we would send the wrecker out to retrieve it. So I do my repairs on Tuesday and Wednesday, and the vehicle still wasn't back. My work was very light that particular week, and I was done with all the repairs by lunch on Wednesday. So I sat down to order my parts. In walks douche sergeant. He instantly begins berating me for being lazy. He then asks if my repairs are made. I tell him that all the ones I could make are, and he asks for the paperwork, which he flips through quickly. He notices the one truck and the conversation goes like this. Is this repair complete? There's nothing written here. No, but no buts. Go out to the lot and fix it. I don't want you doing anything else until it's done. Yes, Sergeant. Our motor pool has assigned spots for each vehicle. I looked through the manual for the size bolts for the particular part, grabbed the appropriate wrenches, and headed out. I laid down in the vehicle's assigned spot, raised my wrenches, and pretended to turn them. I lay there for an hour and a half wrenching air. Operators and mechanics noticed me, but didn't say anything. Several had heard the conversation and laughed a bit. The motor sergeant was walking the lot, doing his thing, when he noticed me laying there. The look on his face was priceless. He either thought that I had finally cracked, I was a bit high-strung those days, or that maybe I had heat exhaustion. So he walks over, and I could see the gears in his head spinning, and he asks, after a minute of thought, what I was doing. I told him I was making the repair to this vehicle, which only added to the confused look on his face. And then he asks, in a tone of voice reserved for the mentally impaired, if I was aware that the vehicle wasn't there. So I replied, I know this, Sergeant, and you know this, but Diaz does not want to hear any buts. He only wants me out in this lot until this repair is complete. Douche Sergeant did eventually get in trouble, just not for this. He did have several equal opportunity complaints for racism that eventually got him, but the motor sergeant knew me well. We had been deployed for a year, knew the situation, and he just laughed and told me to go back to work. He also said that I should have informed him of the situation so it could be resolved in a more productive manner. I quoted something military men have been told for a long time. Follow the last order given. I have quite a few stories with this guy. 2. Here is some backstory for you. Several years ago, my mom was dating this nice man with 2 kids. My younger brother and I liked the boyfriend himself, but his kids were another story. His kids were entitled jerks that always got what they wanted, constantly stole our toys, and were generally a nuisance to be around. I always tried to be a better person, but my brother and I were constantly getting into arguments with them due to their pettiness. They weren't even the worst part of the relationship. The boyfriend's ex-wife was. From my perspective, I felt that she was the type of person that if she couldn't have him, nobody could. She made my mother's and our lives hell, constantly filing false complaints about our side of the family, generally pointed at my brother and I. From harassment to claiming I had stolen the son's toys, which was the other way around, and after going after the boyfriend, claiming he was an unfit parent. Several times she'd try and ruin any plans we had come up with. For example, after spending months planning a trip to New York, last minute she blew a fuse and demanded we cancel the trip so that she could take her own trip with them. We had already gotten a written agreement from her. One time she even demanded the older son and I visit a family therapist. After putting all the blame on me, I told my side of the story. It resulted, without the therapist fully implying, that they agreed I was in the right and them storming out of the room. Among many other reasons, even after my mom and her boyfriend had gotten engaged, the ex-wife was one of the biggest reasons why Mom had decided to call off the engagement. The harassment and drama were just too much for us. It broke her heart to do so, but she made us the priority and got us out of that situation. A few years after the breakup, my small family and I were living happily. I never saw the kids or the dude again. My mom still kept in touch with the former boyfriend, but after some time apart, she's seen the faults in him too. I was in the 8th grade and living life happily. That was until the ex-wife stepped into gym class one day. Apparently, since the breakup, she had gotten her teaching degree and became a substitute teacher. She was now replacing our normal gym teacher who was on maternity leave, as well as acting as the assistant teacher for our health and sex ed class. Basically, I now had to see her pretty much every other day for the rest of the school year. At first, she didn't recognize me. Puberty had hit me hard, changing my appearance drastically, especially for someone who hadn't seen me in like 5 years. Eventually, she recognized my name, and that's when the harassment began anew. All of it was snide remarks about my appearance, constantly pointing me out as an example as to what puberty can negatively do to you. Pimples, facial hair, voice cracking, that sort of stuff. To the class, as if I was the only one dealing with it. The main health teacher didn't know about it either. Basically, everyone in the 8th grade was taking sex ed at the same time. It was technically one extremely large class, but split up into male and female groups. And wasn't I lucky that the ex-wife got all the male half? Mine. I told my mom about it immediately, and she was livid. She sent multiple emails to the school requesting that they switch teachers or at least let me take the class online. It all fell on deaf ears until, with the help of the ex-boyfriend, we showed them dozens of emails, phone calls, and messages, all spouting harassment at my family and I. This resulted in her being fired from the school, and basically being blacklisted from our school district and the surrounding area. If she wanted another teaching job, she would have to find it elsewhere. This resulted in a major legal battle between her and the ex-boyfriend, because she had tried to move out of state with the kids without his nor the court's permission. Apparently, she lost custody of the kids and had to go back to her old job. Don't know what it was. All in all, it was an interesting experience. We cut all ties with that entire family after the whole ordeal and went on with our lives. I'm now a sophomore in college, waiting out the lockdown in my state, while my mom still hasn't had a long-term relationship since then, mostly sticking to online dating. One of them turned out to be a pedo, but that's a story for another day. But she's happier than she's been in a long time. Thank you for listening. 3. Whilst I was at university, I worked in our students' hall, basically a 2-story bar that was subsidized by the government. Because of the subsidy, it was the cheapest place in town. So we would get a couple locals come in. To prevent this, we were supposed to check everyone had a student ID, but no one minded as the locals were usually polite and handled their booze better than most students. My manager, who was a local himself, would encourage locals to come, and would either discourage ID checks or simply not inform new staff of the situation. He would often steal from the bar and would give free drinks to his mates. One night he had a bunch of his buddies in town come in, have a drinking session at the bar's expense, paid for maybe 1 out of 5 drinks, till way past closing and beyond our license. This resulted in the police being called for a noise complaint, and his boss, Hall's head, finding out. To cover his ass, he claimed that the group were locals that we, the bar staff, had happily allowed to stay, and then fudged the accounting for the night to make up for the free drinks. Because of this, he himself demanded we check every student ID, and the head took away some of our employee perks. The Sunday after this all went down, the pool tournament guys came in. These guys rotate which bar they go to every week between a list of maybe 6 that have enough pool tables and lounge space. I personally have served them a half-dozen times. They make their way over to the bar, and the first guy is well into his 40s. "Hey man, before I can serve you, I have to see your student ID." He chuckled and said something along the lines of, "Do I look like a student?" and proceeded to order, "Look, I'm sorry, but I've been told that if you haven't got a student ID, I can't serve you." He started to realize I wasn't just messing with him and looked to the other member of staff, who reiterated the point. "Are you serious? We've been coming here for years." "Yes, sorry. Mike is cracking down on the only students rule. I can grab my supervisor if you want." My supervisor was also a student and explained the situation. He said he was sorry for the inconvenience and that if they had any complaints to call the head, my manager's boss, and even gave out a couple of his cards that were in the office. The pool guys left, which meant no one was really in the building, so we ended up closing early. Next morning, I awoke to my manager screaming down the phone at me, but it was my day off, so I hung up and didn't go to work, as a customer, till past noon. When I did, my customers couldn't wait to tell me what had happened. My manager had come in and had a shouting match with my supervisor in front of everyone grabbing a morning coffee. The head had indeed received some complaints and scheduled a meeting with the manager that morning. Not wanting to face it alone, he took my supervisor with him. I imagine intending to throw him under the bus as much as possible. The head was pissed, A, because all of these 40-something men had called to complain on his personal number on a Sunday. B, because these 40-something men, by their own admission, had been coming for years at the invite of the manager whom they knew well. My manager tried to save face and claim they were associated with the university, that they were in fact lecturers. That it was the bar staff's failing to check for student ID all this time. Turned on my supervisor, saying he'd given them a bad reputation, cost them money by turning them away, and closing early, as well as laying bare every other mistake he had ever made. My supervisor explained that it was never explained to the staff that customers had to be students, as the manager actively encouraged locals to come in, that even lecturers get a form of student ID, and explained to the head about the manager's drinking with his mates and the dodgy accounting he'd do. This led to the CCTV being checked. When the head saw that it was in fact the manager and his mates, that the bar staff rarely put anything through the tills at his request, suspended him on the spot. He said that the accounts would need to be audited, and that he would likely be terminated and even prosecuted. After a surreal couple of weeks, we got our perks back. They hired a new manager, and eventually they installed locks on the doors that could only be opened with a student ID. No idea what happened to the old manager, but by no means a loss. 4. Please be aware the following video contains reference to, but not specific detail in any way, on the death of farm animals, specifically chickens and ducks. It's been 2.5 years, but I can finally post about this. This is juicy, so get ready. Background information. We live in an old and big manor that has been split into 3 attached houses. The houses are about 150 years old, and were built around 5 huge giant sequoias which were about 200 years old. In the UK, giant sequoias are very rare, and the 2 in our garden up the house price by about £60,000. We live next to 2 really nice neighbours, 1 young couple and 1 old couple. This story. Unfortunately, our old neighbours passed away, so their child and her family moved in. Let's call her Jo. Jo was instantly a pain in the ass. We had been sharing chickens with the previous neighbours, and Jo agreed to keep sharing them. However, on her nights, she would constantly forget to put them away, so we would have to check them every night anyway. One night, her little brats thought it would be funny to open our personal duck pen in the night, which leads to a mass slaughter later. The chickens went the same way. About 2 years ago there was a storm and one of her sequoias somehow fell over and died. They were distraught, understandably. But from then on the jealousy started. She would constantly complain about how lucky we were to have 2 sequoias in our garden, and how our sequoia was making too much shade in their garden. It wasn't. Anyway, we just thought it was Joe being a pain. There were a few dry threats like they will chop it down or maybe the next storm will blow it down. Until we came back from a holiday to France to find the huge 6-meter stump and nothing else. I mean, how the fuck do you get rid of a 100-foot tree in 2 weeks? 2 of our old British oak trees had been crushed as well. My mum and sisters crying, my dad red in the face, and we had no evidence Joe had done it. She claimed that there had been a storm and she had to get rid of it. We had a security camera at the front of the house, but you can get in the back if you go through a few fields. We then were given an £8,000 bill for damages to her property, and to have the tree chopped up and removed, the wood alone would have been worth a small fortune. We had lost all hope, and 2 weeks had passed when my dad came running from the garden. We had put up a wildlife camera a few months ago, and it had caught everything. We got a lawyer on the phone and started our revenge. We got a tree surgeon out who said it was an original specimen brought into the UK in 1860. Along with the 2 that were in Elveston Castle Country Park, there were 218 around the UK, but only 60 now. He also told us to call out an engineer because the roots might be in the foundation, so when they rotted could damage the house. Turns out, we would need to redo the foundations. Then we took Joe to court and sued them for damage to property, trespassing, and lots of other smaller claims. The tree would cost $250,000 to have another sequoia that was 200 years put in and looked after. It's basically impossible. Plus the damage to the foundations, which was £200,000, and the 2 oaks, which were another $25,000. So with the smaller claims, it went about £500,000, or $700,000. They had to move out. And we have now paid off the mortgage, done a lovely loft and kitchen conversion, and have basically done up the house and garden as well as planted a 60-year-old sequoia tree in the back garden. We also had our kitchen counter and table made from the old sequoia. We now have a new, lovely family living next to us, who we share chickens, ducks, and pygmy goats with. They're very nice, and I make a fortune babysitting their kids. Five. I used to be a store manager at a video store. This happened about 10 years ago. I used to run numerous video and gaming stores in a popular video and gaming rental chain. It was originally a fun company to work for, as many places start out great. This over my 7 years there, so they started becoming pretty shady, and pretty much turned into another money-hungry place to work. My district manager, we'll call him Dick because it suits him. This is maybe the worst thing he did to me. So, I was running this particular location for about a year, and the company's safety policy of having at least 2 people on staff at all times kinda went out the window about 6 months ago, and was pretty much one person to open or close the store. So one would open, one would close. I had a good worker working for me, we'll call John. He was very dependable and reliable, and all around a good guy. That's why I found this a difficult situation. I would open, John would close. At the start and end of every shift, we had to round down every till to make sure in total it was £75. So it started. When I would come into work and run the 4 tills down, one drawer would be completely empty. I double and triple checked all the cash to see if it was put into another till or left in the safe. Ended up not finding it. So I would go and check the surveillance cameras, noticing that the cameras were shifted over away from the cash registers, as well as the tapes being rewound to honestly I don't know when. But it would record over the actual theft of the register. These tapes recorded into split screen and could only be played back in those types of recorders. I would rewind and try to find when this tape was rewound to and who did it. As to on occasion, we'd be allowed to have another closer, and a few days a week, usually the busier days, another second staff member to help close up. I could not, in the time I had, find where this tape was altered from, tried numerous times. I had to replace the missing money out of pocket, so I kept my eye out, didn't want to think it was John, but kept an eye on him, only to notice numerous more times this same thing kept happening. I would put the cameras back in place to catch whoever it was in the act. Again, every time John closed and I opened, the cameras were moved, tapes were altered. Everything pointing to this said it had to be John. Talked to him, of course he denied it. Said all the money was there when he would close and he didn't touch any cameras. So I contacted my district manager about the situation. He said he would call me back to discuss further action, as to whether or not I was going to terminate John. Because $75 at least 3 times a week out of my pocket adds up. As well as I don't want someone stealing from my store, I can't stand thieves. But I've been going through this for over a month now, and was playing phone tag. Or pretty much just me repeatedly calling my boss, as we are required to have it approved through them to terminate an employee. Dick knew the whole story that was going on and would never give me the okay to fire John, would dodge my calls, while everything continued coming up missing, and pulling more money out of pocket to replace it. Well, I got fed up, I'm done doing this. And since Dick won't give me an okay or any help, I go over his head to the regional manager, who is based in another state. Fill him in on what's going on, and how Dick won't allow me to do anything. 2 weeks later, Dick comes into my store early in the morning before I opened the store with another worker. He also has keys to all the locations, so they were waiting for me. Says he needs to talk to me. Tells me he needs to terminate my employment there because of the theft issue. This same issue I've been trying to talk to him about getting the okay to, what I thought would fix the problem, to no avail. So I'm being fired because he won't help. Well, a few days after I was fired, my other co-worker, who was also a good friend of mine, says the regional boss is looking for me, and she told him Dick fired me. Well, he scheduled Dick to go down to the other state where he's located in the company car he drives to discuss why I was fired. Turns out the regional manager had those tapes pulled from my store and analyzed, and finds spots where they're altered. Well, who do you think was on those tapes but Dick himself stealing from my store? The regional fires him immediately and keeps the company car there and tells him to find his own way home. That was the first smile on my face since being fired, actually a pretty good laugh, but also felt bad for accusing John. I didn't get my job back, didn't want it. The company had gone to hell in a handbasket, and with putting all that money out of pocket and everything else that was out of pocket, and being salaried for 40-hour weeks but having to work 50 to 60-hour weeks mandatory, only to be paid for the 40, it really wasn't worth it. A month later they were all shutting down due to the red box. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, number 46. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. If you have a story yourself you'd like to share, then please do send it along to kingofthecities@gmail.com. I really must say this semi-new approach I've taken to recording really is helping. Currently, as I'm recording this, I've got some very lovely people in the chat on a live stream, just chitty-chatting, listening to me and all the weird sounds and the burping and the farting and the stuttering, purring like a kitten sometimes. But it's all part of the creative process, and it's essential to creating the videos that I create. Without all that, then they just wouldn't be the same. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. Oh yes, and Barry just reminded me, the cursing also. Absolutely. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.